Hey, everybody. So good to be here with all of you tonight. A little bit later than usual, but that's how it works on Wednesdays. But anyway, glad you're here. So, we're going to put on the opening music. We're going to have a late night conversation, just like we do. Yeah, thanks, everybody.
Spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, everybody. So glad that you're here. We're just having another late night conversation, just like we always do, checking in and chatting with people and doing all the fun, awesome things that we do. We're going to follow our usual format, which is first I give my opening remarks. Then from there, we do the roll call where people, can be called out by name. We find out who's watching, who's on the other side of the camera. Always a great group of folks. Then after that, I will answer your questions for the remainder of the show. So if you've got a question to ask me, the best thing to do is to send me a buy me a coffee. You can also do Rumble rants on the Rumble, and you can also do Cash App, Caleb Moppin 22. Just send questions. Get me talking in the second half of our show. That's the best way to do it, is buy me a coffee. But yeah, we're just continuing our usual thing here. We'll follow our normal pattern: opening remarks, followed by the roll call. Then I answer any questions that you have. So I'm just going to jump right into it. A lot is happening, as always. Good things are happening. I actually did an interview with WBAI Radio this morning, which actually summarizes quite a bit of what's been going on in the world. But before we get to that, there was a really important press conference on Capitol Hill today, right? There was a great parade in China for the 80th anniversary of the defeat of Japan and fascism, and we're going to talk about that, obviously. And there was a really important press conference on Capitol Hill with Marjorie Taylor Greene. I am liking Marjorie Taylor Greene more every day. There are some things she says I don't agree with about immigration, about other things, but when it comes to not sending weapons to Ukraine, not sending weapons to Israel, and now this, I mean, she is on fire. This is Marjorie Taylor Greene fighting for the victims of Jeffrey Epstein, demanding that Epstein's crimes be investigated. Here we go.
Good morning. This is my 5th year in Congress, and this is the largest press conference that I've seen since I've been here. And this is because this is an issue that matters so much to Americans. This is an issue that doesn't have political boundaries. It's an issue that Republicans and Democrats should never fight about. As a matter of fact, it's such an important issue that it should bring us all together. It's grieved me to watch the arguments and debates take place among my colleagues and even the administration. I think this is something that was worth fighting for. You see, the women behind me are going to tell you stories that you've never heard before. These are unimaginable horrors that they've lived with for their entire lives since they were very, very young. But these are also similar stories that many children, teenagers, women, and even men are enduring nightmares right now as we speak. You see, these women have been fighting since the 1990s. I heard one woman tell us yesterday since 1996. And they have carried with them shame. But I want to tell you something. The shame does not fall on these brave, courageous women. The shame falls on every single person that coldly turned a blind eye to their abuse. The shame falls on every single person that enabled it. The shame falls on every single person that took money to continue it. And the shame falls on the people in power over the past several decades that protected the monster, Jeffrey Epstein, and his cabal that continued a nightmare. Those people deserve the shame. And today we are coming forward and we are going to fight like hell for these women, because we have to fight like hell for those that are enduring sexual abuse and are living in a prison of shame. Anyone that is being abused, it is not your fault. You should live with no guilt or fear or shame. All of the fault belongs to the evil people that do these things to the innocent. This is the most important fight we can wage here in Congress, is fighting for innocent people that never receive justice. And the women behind me have never received justice. And do you want to know why? It's because Jeffrey Epstein somehow was able to walk among the most rich, powerful people, not only in America, but foreign countries. Yesterday, I heard countries like Saudi Arabia, Russia, and even Israel, and other countries. The truth needs to come out, and the government holds the truth. The cases that are sealed hold the truth. Jeffrey Epstein's estate holds the truth. The FBI, the DOJ, and the CIA holds the truth. And the truth we are demanding come out on behalf of these women, but also as a strong message to every innocent child, teenager, woman, and man that is being held captive in abuse. This should never happen in America, and it should never be a political issue that divides us. And I want to thank Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie for doing something brave, crossing political boundaries for a very important fight. And I'm honored to join both of them. And I'm honored that Nancy Mace and Lauren Boebert signed the discharge petition along with myself. And I asked my Republican colleagues not to choose just one path for justice and transparency and accountability, but I asked my Republican colleagues to choose every path for justice and accountability and transparency.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is one of those cases where, I feel like my position remains consistent. I have said that the way Jeffrey Epstein got special treatment, the way Jeffrey Epstein was close to all kinds of people in the political elite of the United States, the way he died mysteriously and pretty obviously did not kill himself, all of that I've been consistent about from the beginning. And, on the one hand, I'm annoyed that Trump is, said we should move on from it, and that there was talk of releasing more information, and then that talk went away. I'm annoyed by that. I'm also annoyed by all the liberals who, would have told me that Jeffrey Epstein didn't exist and was a big conspiracy theory until recently. But I'm glad that they're on board with it. And, Whitney Webb has done a pretty good job showing that Jeffrey Epstein worked for Israel. That seems to be the case. I mean, he seemed to pretty clearly be an Israeli operative. And the extent to which he engaged in, sex trafficking and blackmail in order to maintain control over politicians, and the extent to which he did that on behalf of Israel, I think ought to be discussed. And I'm disappointed that Trump is not moving ahead on that as he said he would. I'm disappointed by liberals who are suddenly interested, where they just rolled their eyes and said, that's a crazy conspiracy theory. I'm happy with Marjorie Taylor Greene and Thomas Massie and others for speaking up about the issue. And I hope that we can shed more light on this whole situation. I really, really do. That's about all I can say about it. I mean, what more is there to say? I think it's a pretty open shut situation. I did think that Trump was the lesser of two evils in the last election. And some days it feels harder to say that than others, but I see the potential. I see that Russiagate has been exposed as a hoax. I see that the peace summit happened in Alaska. I see that John Bolton got his home raided by the FBI. And, there are good things about Trump. And it is my job, I believe, as an American who loves my country, to push those good things about Trump. And if Trump can end this war in Ukraine that never should have happened, and if Trump can purge the U.S. government and the intelligence apparatus of the neocons with their sinister ideology, and can make it something that faces accountability, lying to get us into a war. Look, let's just be honest here, right? We cannot say this enough. The Russiagate lie, it didn't just hurt Donald Trump's reputation. It didn't just cost the American taxpayers millions of dollars. It killed at least 100,000, hundreds of thousands of people. There never would be a war in Ukraine if there hadn't been Russiagate. If Donald Trump had come into office not under the threat and not under investigation for allegedly being a Russian agent, he could have improved relations with Russia much more. Furthermore, if Donald Trump had won the 2020 election, which he very well should have done, right? But the FBI used Russiagate, claiming that the Hunter Biden laptop was somehow a Russian conspiracy, was Russian propaganda. The FBI used Russiagate to suppress the October surprise about Joe Biden, to make sure that Joe Biden won the election. The FBI interfered with it. If Trump had won that election, he would have not, created a situation where Russia felt the need that they had to engage in the special military operation. There's a war in which hundreds of thousands of people would have died. And that war would never have happened if they hadn't lied to the U.S. public and said that Russia was interfering in our elections. And now we have all the documents showing that Russia did not interfere in our elections. And Tulsi Gabbard has revealed that. And Tulsi Gabbard has stripped of the security clearances a number of people who were involved in pushing that lie, that hoax. And now it appears that one of the most sinister people in our government, John Bolton, has had his home raided and could be indicted. If I see potential for good, I'm going to advance it. Does that mean that I'm going to say, oh, just because Trump says we shouldn't talk about Epstein, we should stop talking about it? No, I think we should talk about Epstein. I think Trump should, go ahead with that. I think we should talk about Epstein. Furthermore, do I think what Trump is doing to Palestine protesters, deporting people for their political views, do I think that's good? No. Do I think supporting Israel is good? No. Do I think threatening Venezuela is good? No. No, I don't think any of those things are good. It's a complicated situation. But for a while, it seemed like Trump, there was nothing good about him. But then the Russiagate drop happened. Then the Alaska summit happened. Then John Bolton got his home raided. And I see some potential for some good. But at the end of the day, Trump is just a politician. He's just a politician. And what we need more than ever is we need there to be a mass anti-imperialist movement in this country. We need people in this country to build a mass movement demanding a government of action that fights for working families. That's really the only thing that can save us. No politician is going to save us. And we need to build a network of people that can educate and carry out operations to build the kind of movement that we need. And until we have the kind of movement that we need, we can't really expect any good results. So we're in an interesting spot. That said, there's another good thing Trump is talking about: sanctioning George Soros. George Soros is notorious for backing and supporting the Democrats and liberals. He also is the guy who brought down the Soviet Union, funding all kinds of color revolution protests. And it looks like Trump may put sanctions on this Hungarian billionaire who is a manipulator, funder of destabilization operations and intelligence operations, the guy who is the architect of the International Criminal Court. It looks like Trump may put sanctions on George Soros. Again, that would be a good thing if it happens. So, we're not campaigning for anybody. And we obviously understand that, we're in a bad situation. This is the death agony of Western imperialism. The imperialist system, and it is going in all kinds of different directions. There are divisions among our ruling class. But there's also a rising new economy in the world, and there are divisions among our elite. And ultimately, we see this as the opening to build the real mass movement to actually change the world. So we're going to do that, why not? Why not? And so we see an opening. We're going to pursue it. Now, I did an interview with WBAI Radio today. They had me on. It's called Frontline Voices is the radio show. They interviewed me about the attack on Venezuela, and they interviewed me about the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit in China. So I thought I would just play that for you. This was heard by thousands of people. New York City is densely populated. WBAI Radio is a well-respected radio station, from Pacifica in New York City. And they had me on for 20 minutes today to just kind of talk about world events. I go on this show pretty regularly. I often post the interviews that I do on WBAI, but this is Rebecca Miles, who's the host of their noon show, Frontline Voices. She had me on, we just talked for 20 minutes.
Now is Caleb Maupin, political analyst, journalist, and writer, author of several books, including Trotsky and the Neoconservatives, The Whole Story, and the Houthis. Who are the Houthis? What are they fighting for? Those two books are readily available online. Welcome to the show, Caleb.
Sure, glad to be here as always.
So let's start with what's happening in Venezuela. The United States Navy and the Marine Corps have a significant military presence in the Southern Caribbean, more specifically in the vicinity of Venezuela's coast. We heard yesterday that the Trump administration is claiming that they bombed, to all intents and purposes, a boat seen leaving the coast and claiming it was part of a gang that was transporting drugs. What do you think is the real objective behind this build-up?
Well, the first thing that needs to be pointed out is it's very unlikely that this boat was actually involved in the drug trade, because if that was the case, they would have, rather than just sinking it and killing the 11 people on board and having all the evidence go to the bottom of the ocean, they would have seized it and arrested the people on board and used whatever evidence was on that ship to further make their case that Maduro is a drug trafficker. But they didn't do that. They instead just decided to just destroy the evidence and the people, which is very, very interesting. Maduro has made clear they are not a narco state, and he has the confirmation of that from the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime. They have done many reports showing that Venezuela is really an insignificant country in Latin America's drug trade. 70% of the drugs produced in Latin America come from Colombia. And if you look at a map, there is no reason that they should then go through Venezuela to get them to the United States. It just doesn't make geographical sense. And that there is a big problem with drug gangs throughout that region, South and Central America, no doubt. But the idea that Venezuela is somehow heavily involved in the drug trade or a narco state, it just doesn't add up. And, many other international actors who don't like Venezuela, many other voices from the NATO countries and others have said these claims that are coming from Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, being echoed by Trump, they don't match the reality. They do have drugs in Venezuela, just like any other country. There are criminal organizations that exist there. But the idea that there's some kind of important hub in the drug trade and that fighting Venezuela is a big effort to fight the drug gangs, that just doesn't add up. It doesn't match the facts, according to all the experts on the drug problem in Latin America.
The State Department has raised a reward for Maduro because they've accused President Nicolas Maduro of heading a narco cartel, up to $50 million, and boasted he was the first target in the history of the narcotics reward program, with a reward offering of exceeding $25 million. How unusual is this escalation, and what purpose does it serve?
Well, Venezuela, they had a president, Hugo Chavez, who put oil under public ownership and then used the oil wealth to build up kind of a state-run economy that is subsidized in the name of socialism of the 21st century, Bolivarian socialism. And they have been able to eradicate illiteracy in the country. They have lifted millions of people out of poverty, and they had a pretty severe food crisis as a result of the oil price drop and the sanctions put on the country. But that's over, and they've actually recovered very significantly. And at this point, they're producing their own food domestically. They have a very close relationship with Iran and with Russia and with China, and they're just kind of a bastion of the new economy that's arising in the world, the BRICS economy, on the continent of South America. And they're a country that has long been a target. And if you listen to what Maduro has pointed out, he has said that basically Marco Rubio, the U.S. Secretary of State, who is a Miami Cuban himself, from a Cuban family in Miami, that he is part of what they call the Miami Mafia, which is a layer of people who've been displaced by governments like the Cuban government, like the Venezuelan government, that have fled to Miami and fled to the United States, and they have a particular bone to pick, a particular grudge against the Marxist governments of Latin America. And one thing that these experts on drugs never want to point to is that one of the greatest examples of getting rid of the drug trade in Latin America is a country that's heavily aligned with Venezuela, and that's Cuba. Cuba has almost no drug traffickers in it. For an island nation in the Caribbean, Cuba has completely wiped out the drug trade. There is no drug problem in Cuba, and Cuba trains the Venezuelan military. The Venezuelan military goes to Cuba pretty frequently for military training. There are Cuban military forces in Venezuela cooperating with the Venezuelan military. So if anything, if Maduro continues to gain strength, he actually has the potential to cooperate with one of the most effective anti-drug countries in the region and perhaps wipe out the drug trade. So the idea that Maduro is a narco leader or something, this doesn't match reality. This is Marco Rubio's agenda, and that so-called Miami Mafia, that's what Maduro calls it, but the anti-Cuba lobby, that is particularly important in the Trump coalition. And right now, Trump is pivoting in ways those folks don't like, trying to get closer to Russia, trying to move away from the NATO countries. So I guess it looks like, escalating against Venezuela, sending the U.S. military, the Navy off to the coast of Venezuela to threaten Venezuela. It looks like this could be some kind of compromise that's being made as Trump pivots kind of in the opposite direction of where those forces want when it comes to the global stage, but perhaps throwing them a bone, giving them something when it comes to their particular pet issues closer to home.
Right. This interest in Venezuela has occurred, it's gone on for several decades now. In 2019, Washington recognized this, obscure Venezuelan legislator, Juan Guaido, as the president of Venezuela, even though 81% of Venezuelans didn't even know who he was at the time. What about these past events and tactics that the U.S. has used to, try and get its hands on it's got the world's largest oil and gas reserves, and this is obviously of interest.
Well, the main thing is they've been trying to get Venezuela's oil off the market. Venezuela is now a competitor with Wall Street. They had a state-run oil company prior to Hugo Chavez, but that state-run oil company just kind of functioned as a middleman for Wall Street. But now Venezuela, they are selling oil on the international markets as competitors. And there has been a huge effort to drive them off the market because they want people buying oil from ExxonMobil and BP and Shell and Chevron. They don't like Russia for similar reasons. They don't like Iran for similar reasons. These are countries that used to be kind of captive markets, and now they're the opposite. They're competitors, and they don't want competition. The interesting thing, though, is that, Venezuela, they have been able to maintain a close relationship with China, and China is a purchaser of their oil. Another thing to point out is that, Venezuela has tried very, very hard to stay out of anything involving criminals, but it's the sanctions from the United States that have, to some degree, it looks like, been an effort to try and push them to cooperating with criminals. Because if you're blocked from transactions in major banks, you're going to have to negotiate with people that know how to engage in bank fraud and things like that. It looks like, as the USA was, pushing Venezuela out of the SWIFT system and out of the official banking apparatus, that Venezuela, who are they going to turn to, right? And that these criminal organizations in Latin America, they know how to manipulate the international banking system. And so if anything, the USA is kind of trying to push Venezuela into the arms of the drug cartels because that would be the only way they could make bank transfers and have transactions, et cetera. We remember that Alex Saab, who was a Venezuelan diplomat, a man born in Colombia, he was grabbed by U.S. officials and held by the Biden administration in Miami for several years before ultimately being returned to Venezuela. And he was somebody who it was alleged, apparently had connections to organized crime. And the allegation was that he was helping Venezuela navigate the international banking system after the USA pushed them out. Well, if you don't want Venezuela to have to cooperate and do that, let them be part of the regular banking system, right? Let them just, trade on Wall Street and trade in the London Stock Exchange like any other country. So the USA is basically trying to push Venezuela into the arms of the drug cartels. But it looks like they have effectively resisted that. And what's being said by Marco Rubio and Trump just doesn't match what's being said by international observers and experts on the drug trade. Venezuela has problems with drugs, but nowhere near as big as Colombia, nowhere near as big as Ecuador. Ecuador is now increasingly becoming a major hub of the drug cartels. And that is something that's being ignored in U.S. media pretty significantly. But since Ecuador pivoted away from Bolivarianism, since Correa was removed, the current leadership of Ecuador has pushed Ecuador closer and closer into the drug trade, and drug trafficking in Ecuador is rising. And you never hear anything about that from the United States, of course.
Right. Now, if we could pivot to the other side of the world and talk about the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit in Tianjin. Some people have called this a pivotal moment in the evolution towards a new world order. In your view, what makes this summit so decisive compared to earlier gatherings?
Well, the timing is important because it was timed to coincide with the 80th anniversary of the defeat of Japan, Victory in Asia Day, VA Day, the defeat of Japan in the Second World War. And there was just a parade where Russian President Vladimir Putin, Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, and Chinese President Xi Jinping all marched together in this big military parade that just happened to celebrate the victory over Japan. Donald Trump was invited. They wanted Japan to be there because it was American support for China against the Japanese that secured their victory. However, Donald Trump didn't appear. Even today, there's a phrase that they use in the U.S. Marine Corps, gung-ho. Well, gung-ho, that was actually the slogan of the Chinese Industrial Cooperative Association. It means all together. And it was popularized in the U.S. military because the U.S. Marine Corps adopted some of the military training tactics of Mao Zedong during the Second World War. And there was a Hollywood movie called Gung-ho that popularized it. So when fascism was being defeated, and when Japan was the enemy of the United States, along with Nazi Germany, the USA and Chinese Communist Party were happy to work together. But now, obviously, that's not the case. And so this big meeting of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization happened at the same time as the big parade. Now, Putin, the Russian leader, just has given a press conference at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization event. He emphasized that in a multipolar world, all countries should be treated equally and treated with respect. They emphasized technological advancements, the possibility. There was a discussion, apparently, between Kim Jong-un and President Xi and President Putin about how they're going to aim to raise the human life expectancy to 150 years, which I find to be very interesting. But they are arguing that now with AI and biotechnology, human organs can be replaced. And it could be very possible within the next 20 years that we have human beings who live over 150 years old. That's very exciting. And the focus of the new BRICS economy, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the BRICS, the Eurasian Economic Union, the focus is economic growth and development. These are countries that have been kept in poverty by colonialism, kept as captive markets of Wall Street, that have broken out as a result of the anti-colonial revolutions of the 20th century. And they've started on their own course of development. And their population is rising, and their life expectancy is rising. And they're setting up alternative networks of trade, alternative banking systems, alternative trade routes. The biggest thing that has happened, I will say, is that Russia and China signed an agreement to build a huge trans-Siberian natural gas pipeline. And that's a really big deal. There's going to be a huge natural gas pipeline connecting the Russian Far East and Siberia with China. And that is a huge deal. Donald Trump is kind of tap dancing and trying to downplay it because that's seen as kind of a loss for the United States. But the amount of natural gas that Russia is going to start selling to China is going to drastically increase. That's a huge win for Russia. A huge win for Russia because Russia has been, there's been efforts by the United States to isolate Russia, to prevent them from selling oil and gas on the international markets. China's purchases and energy relationship with Russia just greatly expanded as a result of this deal that was signed. And Donald Trump is almost kind of, backed into a corner here, looking bad because Russia and China are closer than ever before.
Right. Russian President Vladimir Putin has emphasized the Shanghai Cooperation Organization development program, saying it defines the group's strategic path for the decade. And now there's a call for an SCO development bank aimed at reducing dependence on Western financial institutions and lessening the impact of sanctions. Could this bank realistically rival the IMF and World Bank?
Well, China already has the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. That's the Belt and Road Bank that they've been using to fund infrastructure projects. And a Shanghai Cooperation Organization bank could play a similar role. But again, this kind of gets back to what we were talking about with Venezuela. This is the game that the so-called collective West, or the NATO countries, or the old British Empire, Wall Street and London economic system, this is the game they play. If you don't do what they want, they lock you out of the banking transactions. You can't do SWIFT transactions. You can't transfer money. Well, this is China and Russia saying, all right, we'll set up our own banking system. And, we can just trade with each other this way. And this is the kind of thing that infuriates the Western countries. And that, in the 90s, after the fall of the Soviet Union, if a country was at odds with the United States, like Iraq, like Cuba, or North Korea, they could just be devastated by sanctions. Sanctions could just destroy them. Iraq lost about 500,000 children because they were locked out of the global economy. They were unable to import chlorine for their water system. North Korea had a food crisis in the 90s. Cuba, they did not have a food crisis. They didn't have a crisis of malnutrition, but they suffered a lot. I mean, they had electricity for only a few hours a day in some cities. It was pretty bad in the 90s. But the 90s is a really long time ago. This is 2025. And nowadays, if America doesn't like you and says, oh, we won't trade with you, you say, fine, we'll trade with Russia, we'll trade with China, we'll trade with Iran and Venezuela. What are you going to do about it? And the USA doesn't realize that putting sanctions on all these countries just expedites the process of people taking their money elsewhere, right? And that they don't have the ability to just cancel countries anymore, and that the more they do it, the less it's going to be effective, right? I think in the movie Star Wars, Princess Leia says, the more you tighten your grip, the more they'll slip out of your fingers. And that's kind of the situation we're in, that if anything, the USA should be smart and stop using sanctions like this, because it's only going to lead to further expediting the process of a new economy emerging and making more and more countries pull their money out of the Western system so they can keep doing business with countries that the West has sanctioned.
Also at this meeting was Turkish President Erdogan, a NATO leader, and they've described it as symbolic of Turkey's strategic flexibility. Does his participation signal a deeper shift away from NATO, or is it more of a hedging? Because they're kind of in the center of this.
Well, Turkey is technically a member of NATO, but President Erdogan is very, very anti-Israel. He took power. He was elected as an Islamist, which is a big deal in Turkey because Turkey's government has historically been quite secular and nationalist. But he was elected on an Islamist platform. He's a supporter of the Muslim Brotherhood and the kind of westernized wing of Sunni Islam, and he's very anti-Israel, and that he has, to some degree or other, pivoted Turkey in an independent direction. Now, not always, when it comes to Libya, when it comes to some countries, he has, taken the U.S. side. So he's more of an independent leader. He's technically a member of NATO, but he's very anti-Israel, and he's very, very, very much willing to cooperate with Russia and China if they'll make him a better deal. And you can say the same about Modi. Modi, the leader of India, has a really big beef with China. China and India are not good friends. But if Russia will make a better deal, and even China, if they'll make a better deal for India, Modi is independent enough that he'll take the deal. And that's what we need to remember about Erdogan and Modi. And I think we should expect to see more governments like this that are not, fully on board with Russia and China, but are not fully on board with the United States either. And they'll go with either side that will make them a deal. And, Brazil is a country that plays a similar role. to Turkey, and that this is kind of a third category that is rising of countries that will go either way. It kind of parallels the non-aligned movement during the Cold War, you could argue. And I think that Erdogan is very opposed to Israel. He represents an Islamic country, and at this point, he's looking towards the rising economy in the East because the Western system is tied in with Israel, and the Western countries are having big problems, not just the United States, but Europe, the refugee crisis, internal turmoil. So the West is not looking like the best place to do business necessarily. So he's playing both sides.
Got it. Caleb Maupin, insightful as always. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon.
Sure. Always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was my kind of global update on WBAI this afternoon. It was definitely a lot of fun. And, the parade that happened in China was pretty epic. I've got a couple clips of that to show. This was the parade commemorating the victory over fascism, the military parade in Beijing.
Special thanks to our sponsor, Palin.
Yeah, and so I guess it's contrasting it with the American military parade there towards the end. That's amusing. And that this was, a big moment. I mean, not only did they have the parade, they also had the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit. They signed this really, really important deal between the United States, between Russia and China when it comes to natural gas. And I guess this is the video overview of Russian President Putin's trip. If you want to see the video of Russian President Putin and his visit to China here for the Shanghai Cooperation Summit.
Поговорим о планах на ближайшую и среднесрочную перспективу. Благодарю вас.
Безопасность одной страны не может быть обеспечена за счет безопасности другой страны, в данном случае Российской Федерации.
Yeah, so that's kind of just an overview of the trip. Yeah, I thought Russia was isolated. There you go. Now, in my interview that I gave on WBAI, I did reference how the slogan that is still to this day used by the U.S. Marine Corps, gung ho, is a communist slogan. And it was adopted by the U.S. Marine Corps. It's from the Chinese Industrial Cooperative Association. It means all together, solidarity. It became popularized because they made a World War II propaganda film about a group of U.S. Marines who adopted Mao Zedong's fighting style. So I wanted to just show a clip from that movie because I just think that's neat. This is the Hollywood movie 1943 Gung Ho, showing the admiration for Mao and the 8th Route Army that fought Japan during World War II among the U.S. military brass.
What? Colonel! Well, I had an idea you'd show up.
Well, when I heard you was back, I just busted right in.
I'd have been so if you hadn't. Come on, sit down. Where was it last time, Manila?
Oh, Colonel, you forgot. China, the Yancey Patrol.
Right. Well, you know transport. I wasn't on the river long.
Yeah, I know. And me and the rest of the old gang could hardly believe it when we heard you quit the Marines.
Well, I felt bad about that, but I had to do it that way. I can talk about it now. You know where I went?
We heard you were sick and went back to the States, but that didn't seem like you.
Must have been a couple of Army guys.
Where did you go, Colonel?
I joined the Chinese Army.
Are you kidding, sir?
And not even the Chinese Marines.
What for?
Well, I could see this war with Japan coming. You didn't have to look far for that. I realized that our first line of defense would be China. So I decided to find out just what her war potential was, just how long she could hold out. I joined the Chinese 8th Route Army. Remember that march they made during the Civil War, 6,000 miles clear across the country?
Was they Chinese in the Civil War? I thought there was General Sherman marching along the... Oh, forgive me, sir. I wasn't trying to make no crack, honest. It's just that I don't read the papers past the funny page. Will you excuse me, sir?
Never mind transport. Anyway, that's all over. All the Chinese are united now against the Japs. I've been hearing marvelous things about the guerrilla tactics of the 8th Army. This is right after Shanghai. I made up my mind to find out about them. I couldn't go in uniform, so I went without.
Plenty of fighting, huh, sir?
Transport, you never saw anything like it. Just look at those half-armed, ill-fed peasants. They outmarched, outfought, outmaneuvered the Japs at every turn because they believed in what they were fighting for. Because every man had only one desire, to do his duty. Well, I learned a lot of things that are not in textbooks, and I came back to the States to tell about them. Then, Pearl Harbor, and here we go again.
I don't ask for nothing better, sir.
Transport, we're going to try out something new. Headquarters giving me a free hand. You'll see some fun before we're through.
I hope them Japs have got a sense of humor. They're going to need it.
I want you for my personal...
Hey, attention! Sir, the battalion is formed.
Take your post.
At ease. Sit down, boys, and make yourselves comfortable. The smoking lamp is lit. Boys, this is our first get-together, but it won't be our last. You probably wonder what this is all about. Well, I can't tell you now. You'll learn as you go along. But I can say this. You are to receive a course of training unique in the history of the Marine Corps. If you justify the effort to be spent on you, you may be able to point the way in which this tremendously difficult war in the Pacific can be won. Briefly, it can be won by teamwork, by trained men fighting together with the precision of a machine. But it's more than that. It must be a harmonious machine. Now you start with the fundamentals. And at the bottom of everything is self-discipline. You must start by casting out all prejudices. Racial, religious, every other kind. I want you to feel free to ask questions, even embarrassing ones. Come to me with suggestions. We're going to be more than officers and men in this. We're going to be comrades. What I eat, you will eat. Where I sleep, you will sleep. I will take you into my confidence whenever it's possible before going into battle. We'll have a meeting in which I'll explain our plans and objectives so that each of you can make a more intelligent contribution to the result. Afterward, we'll have another meeting to criticize the way in which the operation was conducted. We'll fight and endure and win together. A Ahead of you lies a hard road. You'll often have bad food and very little of that. Many times your bed will be a muddy ditch. You'll march until you think you're exhausted and then be called on to start out again. To carry you through the rough spots before you, teamwork is needed. You'll have to help each other. The Chinese have a word for it. It is gung-ho. Gung to work, ho harmony. I propose it as our motto. Gung-ho. Come on, now give it to me.
Yeah, that's the movie. That's Gung Ho, 1943, a Hollywood movie about U.S. Marines adopting the fighting style of the 8th Route Army. And you heard it all there. We're going to be comrades, criticism, self-criticism, cast off all prejudice, racial, religious, or otherwise. Right? That was Hollywood promoting the communist anti-fascist resistance. There's actually a book that Edgar Snow wrote during World War II. I've got it here somewhere, that kind of celebrating the various communist militias around the world that fought against fascism. It's called People on Our Side. I've got it somewhere. Edgar Snow, the guy who wrote Red Star Over China, he wrote a book called People on Our Side, where he showed the communist anti-Japan fighting forces in India, the communist resistance in Eastern Europe. And yeah, it's called People on Our Side. It's pretty good. Edgar Snow was a guy from Missouri. He was the first person to ever interview Mao. He was the last person to ever interview Mao. Very interesting guy. He went to the Missouri School of Journalism, lived a very unconventional life. Very, very interesting fellow. If you ever get a chance to read Red Star Over China, that was basically the novel that popularized Mao in the English-speaking world. This American journalist who lived in China went and interviewed the leader of the Red Bandit Army, they called it, and he interviewed Mao in the Red Army camp. And during the first interview he did with Mao, Mao took off his pants and started checking to see if he had any lice. Because the conditions in the camp, it was, they were in very dirty battlefield conditions. And he was just kind of blown away because he said, he thought he was going to interview Mussolini or some, important leader. And here he's interviewing a guy who lives in a cave. And during the middle of the interview, as they just start, he takes his pants off, and that Mao very much, lived in the same conditions as the people he fought alongside. And he had a very humble abode. He lived in a cave, and he had a trunk that he sat on to eat his food, and he had a bed, like a cot that he slept on. And, there you go. So, pretty wild stuff. So, yeah, I gave a talk a few years back called Mao Zedong and American Socialists. And I talked about the kind of overlap between the American communists and the Chinese communists. There's Agnes Smedley, was an American anti-imperialist activist who ended up dying in China and became an enthusiastic supporter of the Chinese Revolution. There's also William Hinton, who wrote Fan Shen. He was an American auto mechanic who went over to China and wrote about a particular village and how it was impacted by land reform. Anna Louise Strong, who I really like, she did a lot about Soviet Russia, but then she ultimately became a supporter of Mao, and she ended up dying in China. And she spent the final years of her life in China working alongside Zhou Enlai and Mao. And that Mao, it's kind of interesting. Mao had there was a particular attachment that Mao had to kind of New England radicals, right? There's the whole tradition in America of like New England radicals, going back to, the time of, I think, Henry David Thoreau and Ralph Waldo Emerson and such. And there's kind of a whole tradition of like, WASPs, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, who believe it is like their moral duty to stand against injustice, and those were the abolitionists. Those are the people that bankrolled and funded John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry and such. And for some reason, Mao had a particular attachment. Those people became Maoists. It's interesting because communism in America, it largely, communism, we're talking about like Marxist-Leninist, like the Communist Party USA, it tended to be Jewish folks, Eastern European folks, Italian folks, and Irish folks, and African Americans, especially as the communists, grew. But when the Communist Party was founded as a breakaway from the Socialist Party, it was largely more recent immigrant communities in like 1910, 1920, lower and deeper to the real masses. And, there had been a wave of immigration from Eastern Europe, Italy, and Ireland in the early parts of 1900. And so the Communist Party was the more recent immigrants, whereas the Socialist Party was the more conservative, less recent immigrants, WASPs, people from Belgium and Germany and places like that tended to stay with the Socialist Party, but the Communist Party was more recent immigrants. But Maoism, for some reason, William Hinton, his parents had started the Putney School. It's actually kind of fascinating. The Putney School I think it's still around. It's in Vermont. Yeah, it is a really prestigious boarding school. And William Hinton's mother founded it, and he ended up becoming the big Maoist. And it was founded by his mother, and it was like a really advanced liberal school, boarding school for children. The Putney School. It's in Vermont, right? And it was started, and then the son of the guy of the family that started the Putney School, the son of them ended up becoming a Maoist communist, one of the most well-known Maoist communists, William Hinton. And it's very interesting, right? There is kind of the WASP, the New England WASP radicals, New England radicals, for some reason, Maoist communism has a particular appeal to them. It's very, very interesting. I knew somebody years ago who actually went to the Putney School, attended the Putney School. She ended up becoming a Maoist communist later in her life. She wasn't one when she went to Putney, though. So there you go. It's pretty interesting. And Agnes Smedley and Edgar Snow and William Hinton and Anna Louise Strong, all of them kind of represented a layer of people who did kind of come from, older. They were in the country. Their families had been in the country for a few generations. They were from wealthier families and such, but they were attracted to the Maoist image, right? So I think that's kind of interesting, right? It wasn't your typical communist who became a Maoist, right? The Chinese Communist Party's appeal was to a particular like puritanical righteousness that you find in the American soul, whereas the Communist Party was a labor party, a party of industrial workers and labor unionists who were attracted to the Bolshevik Revolution and all that. The Maoist sphere, China always had its own following in international communism. Even long before the Sino-Soviet split, when Khrushchev and Mao had their falling out, Chinese communism always had a layer of people that followed it in particular, that were attracted to Chinese communism. And those folks tended to be New England intellectuals. And I think that's very, very interesting. And it says a lot about the American Revolution and, you can, and like criticism, self-criticism, two-line struggle, contradiction. There's certain concepts in the Maoist approach to doing things that are particularly attractive to those folks, right? So yeah. Thought I would talk about that, but we're just doing another late night stream. I see that we got a couple Rumble rants that have come in, and we've got a couple super chat. We've got one question that has come through from John, on Buy Me a Coffee. So if you got anything you want me to talk about in the second half of the show, send me buy me a coffee or whatever. I'm going to read some more from the book that I've been reading to you all. But yeah, if you got any more questions for the second half of the program, send a Rumble rant, Caleb Moppin22 on Cash App, or buy me a coffee. That's a great way to send your question. And I'm just going to continue reading from The New Communist Movement, Party Building in America in the 1970s. We read up to page 19 last night. I'm going to keep plowing through this book that goes over the history of the new communist movement of the 1970s. And then eventually we'll cut it and we'll have an audio book of it. So here we go. This is starting on page 19. This is The New Communist Movement, Party Building in 1970s America. All right, here we go. Students for a Democratic Society was the main vehicle through which 1960s new leftists who moved in a communist direction converged. The group claimed 2 million members in 1969. By that time, the ban on communists had been dropped, and the two communist factions, both of which took inspiration from China rather than the Soviet Union, dominated the organization. The largest presence within SDS was the Progressive Labor Party. PLP had been founded by pro-Stalin members who had quit the Communist Party in the early 1960s. Progressive Labor Party had organized illegal trips to Cuba to defy the travel ban when it was imposed in the early 1960s. While the Communist Party concealed its views and operated as a kind of semi-secret organization among the wider liberal, pacifist, and civil rights circles, Progressive Labor Party did the opposite, screaming communism at the top of its lungs. Progressive Labor Party was most likely the first communist organization that any activist would come into contact with. The group waved red flags, carried pictures of Mao and Stalin, and sang, "Give me that old communism," to the tune of "Give me that old-time religion." Progressive Labor Party members condemned hippie counterculture as bourgeois decadence and forbid members to use drugs or to have long hair. Young recruits to Progressive Labor Party were encouraged to spend their summer break working in factories, selling newspapers to their co-workers. Progressive Labor Party opposed property destruction in campus protests, saying it made more work for campus employees and was therefore anti-working class. By the late 1960s, the politics of the Progressive Labor Party were shifting away from the global communist movement. When the Vietnamese National Liberation Front began negotiating with the United States in Paris in the hopes of ending the war, Progressive Labor Party condemned this as selling out and claiming that the revisionist leaders were holding back a, quote, real revolution in Vietnam. Progressive Labor Party members were known to condemn the Vietnamese for shooting at U.S. troops rather than trying to recruit them and give them leaflets as they were the working class. Progressive Labor Party proclaimed revolutionaries must fight nationalism, and on this basis condemned all organizing on nationalist lines, emphasizing a strict workers versus bosses understanding. As the Black Panthers emerged as the symbol of Black revolutionary activism, Progressive Labor Party condemned the Black Panthers as Black fascists and reverse racists, invoking Lenin's critique of the Jewish Bund. These positions, along with their anti-counterculture stances, pushed Progressive Labor Party to be more and more isolated from student radicals. Progressive Labor Party also maintained a very dumbed-down political atmosphere, eventually not even referring to Marxism, Leninism, or quoting from Marxist texts, but just talking about fight for socialism, win communism, with a fight between the workers and the bosses. PLP began referring to the Soviet government as the fake red bosses and more or less distanced itself from the communist governments, all the communist governments in the world except for China. After China's foreign policy began shifting in the 1970s, they denounced China as well. The shift in PLP's politics that was emerging during the late 60s came as a result of internal dynamics. Due to the Black freedom struggle, the role of communists in African liberation, Progressive Labor Party was becoming a majority Black organization. Bill Epstein was a very effective organizer of the group in Harlem and was sent to prison for his activism. Older white leaders of Progressive Labor Party felt threatened by the number of young Black radicals who joined the organization and also admired the Black Panthers and various Soviet-aligned African revolutionaries. In their document, The Five Retreats, A History of the Failure of the Progressive Labor Party, Jim Dan and Harry Dillon explained the trajectory of the organization's emerging opposition to the Black liberation movement and the Vietnamese National Liberation Front. At the PLP convention of 1968, on the motion of Milt Rosen, the party's Black Liberation Commission, which had been headed by Bill Epstein, was stripped of all authority and soon went out of existence. In January 1969, the party lost its very popular 2-year-old Liberation bookstore in Harlem when the manager, Una Malzek, was expelled from the Progressive Labor Party because she refused to buy the Progressive Labor Party's retreat from the Black liberation movement. Rosen characterized the bookstore as a nationalist center in Harlem, and he pushed Epstein to struggle with Molzek to challenge the nationalist character of it, meaning sell more challenges and less material about the Black liberation movement. Molzek, a well-known Black woman Marxist leader in Harlem, was expelled. She and her co-workers in the bookstore then expelled Progressive Labor Party from the bookstore. Progressive Labor Party had no serious desire to take back the bookstore. The party lost interest in the Marxist-Leninist Center in Harlem. Meanwhile, within the National Committee, criticism of Bill Epstein, the only remaining Black leader in New York, sharply mounted. At the convention, the post of vice president of the party, which had been held since 1965, was quietly abolished. All this more and more clearly indicated a strong craving of the Milt Rosen leadership to get out of the Black liberation movement at all costs. Inside of Students for a Democratic Society, Progressive Labor Party pushed opposition to the Black Panthers and to supporting the Vietnamese National Liberation Front. They instead wanted SDS to get more jobs in factories and urged their co-workers to fight the bosses with wildcat strikes as part of a workers-student alliance. The opponents of the Progressive Labor Party inside of SDS, including most of the organization's well-known public faces, took on the name Revolutionary Youth Movement, but soon became known by their nickname, Weatherman, after a document that they published entitled, You Don't Need a Weatherman to Know Which Way the Wind Blows. In examining why they expelled Progressive Labor Party from the organization, Revolutionary Youth Movement wrote, SDS is an organization of revolutionary youth. We are building a fighting force in the heart of the U.S. empire to struggle against the exploitation and oppression of the people of the world. The Progressive Labor Party and the Workers' Student Alliance that built progressive labor inside of SDS are counter-revolutionaries who oppose the struggles of the world's people against U.S. imperialism. We have also come to understand as white people who live in the heart of imperialism that although exploited by capitalism, we receive minor privileges in the form of crumbs off of the imperialist table. If we are ever to achieve our own liberation, it must come from fighting on the side of the people of the world against the imperialist monster, fighting on the side of the Vietnamese, the blacks and browns, supporting their struggle and actively participating in international war. Unlike the Progressive Labor Party, Revolutionary Youth Movement embraced hippie counterculture and announced that most white workers in America were bought-off labor aristocrats or pigs. They argued that counterculture youth who had, quote, picked up a joint would be won to the side of the Black freedom struggle and the anti-imperialist countries. White youth must take sides now, bring the war home, became the slogans of a wing of long-haired, drug-using activists who called themselves the Americong and waved the Vietnamese National Liberation Front flag at protests. The Weatherman men began staging kick-ass marches where they assembled and broke windows. At the 1969 SDS convention, the Progressive Labor Party and the Revolutionary Youth Movement parted ways in a chaos-filled gathering full of fistfights, profanity, and waving of Mao's Little Red Book. The SDS convention was a national news event as it descended into chaos. Both factions announced they were the real SDS. The Workers' Student Alliance, led by Progressive Labor Party, announced it was holding a work-in and would organize young radicals to get jobs in factories. Weatherman announced its plan for a series of violent protests called the Days of Rage in Chicago in the coming fall. Various youth associated with Weatherman lived together across the country and engaged in a variety of left adventurist street actions in the hopes of building up toward the events of October 8th through 11th. Weatherman announced that monogamy was reactionary and began encouraging its members to engage in group sex. The group also required members to be interrogated while under the influence of LSD to see if they were police infiltrators. Leaders of the Weather Collective houses around the country would subject members to, quote, gut checks, pressing them to do illegal and uncomfortable things to see how far they were willing to go. Many within the anti-Progressive Labor Party faction of SDS were extremely uncomfortable with Weatherman's tactics and culture of violence. Bob Avakian, Mike Klonsky, Mary Lou Greenberg, and many others announced they were breaking with Weatherman to form Revolutionary Youth Movement 2, and they denounced the Days of Rage. When the Days of Rage kicked off on October 8th, the turnout was quite dismal. A crowd of roughly 300 people smashed windows and dodged police gunfire. Some bombs went off in the following few days. Richard Elrod, a prosecuting attorney in Chicago who enjoyed joining with police to beat up protesters, was paralyzed for life by a blow from a Weatherman baseball bat to the back of his neck. Hundreds were arrested. Fred Hampton of the Black Panther Party denounced the Days of Rage. He announced that the Black Panthers were aligned with Revolutionary Youth Movement 2. In a TV interview asking if the Panthers supported the Days of Rage, he said, "We believe that the Weatherman action is anarchistic, opportunistic, individualistic, it's chauvinistic, it's custoristic, and that's the bad part about it. It's custoristic, and that these leaders take people into situations where the people can be massacred. And they call that revolution, that's child's play. It's folly. We think these people may be sincere, but they are misguided, they're muddleheads, and they're scatterbrained." On December 4th, Fred Hampton was murdered in a planned police assassination. The press declared a vicious Panther attack and tried to blame the violence on the Panthers shooting at police, but tours of the apartment later proved that the Panthers had not fired a single shot. All the bullets came from the police, who had unloaded hundreds of rounds into Fred Hampton's body as he was sleeping in his bed. Hampton had unified the various gangs in Chicago into a rainbow coalition and was organizing them to fight for economic justice. He had started a breakfast program for children that was declared by the FBI to be the greatest internal threat to national security. J. Edgar Hoover wrote in an internal FBI document that the breakfast program, quote, promotes at least tacit support for the Black Panther Party among naive individuals, and what is more distressing, it provides the Black Panther Party with ready audiences composed of highly impressionable youths. Consequently, the Breakfast for Children program represents the best and most influential activity going for the Black Panthers. As such, is potentially the greatest threat to the efforts by authorities to neutralize the Black Panthers and destroy what it stands for. In the aftermath of Hampton's killing in December of 1969, the Weathermen convened a National War Council in Flint, Michigan. At the event, they celebrated the recent murders of Charles Manson in Los Angeles and announced plans to launch armed struggle, and declared that white workers were pigs who would go down with the ruling class. The leadership, Bernardine Dohrn, Bill Ayers, Mark Rudd, and Jeff Jones, were all the children of millionaires who had built up a reputation in the media as outlaws and extremists. An account of the National War Council published in The Guardian describes how one of the leaders of Revolutionary Youth Movement 2 confronted the leaders of Weatherman about their dismal dismissal of the white working class. Weatherman, virtually all white, continues to promote the notion that white working people in America are inherently counter-revolutionary, impossible to organize, or just plain evil honky bastards, as many Weathermen put it. Weatherman's bleak view of the post-revolutionary world comes from an analysis of American society that says class doesn't count, race does. White workers are in fact fighting for their survival, insisted people doing organizing work in California. They claim that the strikes for wage increases and job security can fairly easily be linked to anti-imperialist analysis. But Weatherman denies that survival is an issue for the white workers. Weatherman leader Howie Matchinger derided white workers for desiring better homes, better food, and essentially better lives. Bob Avakian from the Revolutionary Union of the Bay Area argued not only do white workers need those things for their survival, but that black people need them and want them too. The several black people who Weatherman had brought to the meeting shouted "right on" and waved their fists. If you can't understand that white workers are being screwed too, that they are oppressed by capitalism before they are racist, then you have just shown your class origins, said Avakian. Matchinger shot back, when you try to defend honky workers who just want more privilege from imperialism, you show your race origins. The Weatherman position boiled down to inevitable race war in America, with very few honkies, except perhaps the 400 people in the room, and a few street kids or gang members who might run with them surviving the Holocaust. That notion is linked to Weatherman's concept of initiating armed struggle now and not waiting to build mass white support. That is, a small but courageous white fighting force will do material damage that will weaken imperialism while the Black liberation movement smashes the imperialist motherfucker by itself. Matchinger talked a lot about how the Black liberation movement is so far advanced at this point that the only thing left for white revolutionaries to do is support blacks by fighting cops as a diversionary tactic. Shortly after the Flint War Council, the Weatherman disappeared. The overwhelming majority of the members had no information and simply found the offices locked and abandoned. Later, a small group of 30 to 60 people began conducting symbolic bombings, operating as a completely clandestine organization. With Weatherman having disappeared into a small ultra-leftist terrorist organization, the Revolutionary Youth Movement, too, found itself in the position of being the primary communist organization that supported the Black Panthers and the Vietnamese National Liberation Front. RIM 2 was a mishmash of different radicals from around the country, most college-aged. They lived in houses with other radicals and looked to China as a source of inspiration and had some kind of aspiration to build a new communist party that would have a base of support among the population, as the Communist Party USA had during the 1930s. Revolutionary Youth Movement 2 met with the Black Panthers and had a close relationship. The Panthers urged white radicals to organize their own people to be anti-imperialist. Huey Newton eventually planned to merge the various nationalities into a united communist party, and this was part of his theory of intercommunalism. He argued that revolutionary organizations would be formed first on the basis of nationalities, and they would eventually unify. The Young Lords were formed among the Puerto Rican Americans, the Brown Berets among Chicanos, I War Kun among Asian Americans, etc. An organization called the Young Patriots was formed among Appalachian youth that actually used the Confederate flag as its symbol and sought to organize low-income white workers. Revolutionary Youth Movement 2 aimed to follow the Panthers' advice and sought to organize white industrial workers into a new communist party that would be aligned with the Panthers and the Vietnamese. The Revolutionary Youth Movement 2 almost immediately broke into a variety of different organizations that were aimed at party building. Mike Klonsky, the son of a high-ranking member of the Communist Party, formed the October League and traveled to China to get the official blessing of Beijing. Bob Avakian, the son of a judge in the Bay Area, formed the Revolutionary Union, which eventually became the Revolutionary Communist Party. H. Bruce Franklin, a professor at Stanford University, who was fired from his tenured position for encouraging and organizing his students to engage in violent protests, briefly worked with the Revolutionary Union before forming his own organization called Venceremos. Jerry Tung, a China-born activist in New York City, led the Asian Study Group, a Marxist education circle aimed at Asian Americans and those who did not speak English. Jerry Tung went to prison briefly on charges of inciting a riot, and once he was released, his organization worked rapidly. Eventually, the Asian Study Group formed the Workers' Viewpoint Organization, a communist group that set up offices across the country. Among those who worked with them was Michio Kaku, the famous physicist. In October of 1979, the organization changed its name to the Communist Workers' Party. The Communist Workers' Party was unique in that it was a majority Asian American organization, whereas most of the organizations were primarily white. Nelson Peary, an older black activist who had broken with the Communist Party, formed the Communist League, which eventually became the Communist Labor Party. The group gained significant influence in Detroit, recruiting among the labor upsurge of auto workers. A group called the Communist Party USA Marxist-Leninist was formed by Michael Lasky and eventually began coordinating with a British academic named Hardiel Baines, who formed a network of communist parties that eventually aligned with Albania. The well-known African-American poet and playwright Amiri Baraka, also known as Leroy Jones, changed the name of his black nationalist organization, the Congress of African People, to the Revolutionary Communist League Marxist-Leninist Mao Zedong Thought in 1974. The organization maintained a presence among black radicals and eventually merged into the League for Revolutionary Struggle, Marxist-Leninist, with Chicano and Asian American organizations in 1978. The group ran black cultural centers in Newark, New Jersey, and other parts of the country. A number of smaller organizations emerged as well. A few older communists in Boston who had broken with the Communist Party in the 1950s and supported China and Albania formed Youth for Stalin and the Rayo Light Group. The Central Organization of United States Marxist-Leninists, which eventually called itself the Marxist-Leninist Party USA, came into existence. A slew of newspapers and collectives with names like Seize the Time, Sojourner Truth Organization, Revolutionary Workers League, Proletarian Unity League, Red Dawn Committee Marxist-Leninist, etc. began operating. The number of tiny pro-Beijing sects is far too numerous to count. The Revolutionary Communist Party, the Communist Workers' Party, the Communist Labor Party, the October League, which eventually was called the Communist Party Marxist-Leninist, all had a few thousand members. The other organizations, which were numerous, mostly had fewer than 100 members in total, often just 5 to 10. The Guardian newspaper was the publication that functioned as the new communist movement's main forum for debate and discourse. Erwin Silber, a folk singer who had worked with Pete Seeger and Woody Guthrie, was the editor. Silber used the Guardian to try and unify the groups by convening forums and events featuring different organizations. The Guardian published news about what the various organizations were doing. Monthly Review was the new communist movement's academic journal and book publisher. The Guardian was subsidized by Beijing starting in 1972. According to Max Elbaum's History of the NCM, Revolution in the Air, 60s Radicals Turn to Lenin, Mao, and Che. Elbaum wrote, managing editor Jack Smith visited China. Smith was less ideologically oriented than Silber, but he was attuned to currents that might provide support to the always struggling paper. He returned with an agreement for the Guardian to sponsor tours to China, which could provide a vehicle for U.S. activists to experience the Chinese Revolution close up and simultaneously raise funds. Some estimate that as many as 2 million people may have been affiliated with the new communist movement at one time or other, based on polling conducted at the time. Others estimate the political current to be much smaller, perhaps 20,000 to 60,000. Dedicated activists. For the course of the 1970s, the NCM was a highly visible part of American life. Movies and popular culture from the time reflect how prevalent it was, despite being a fringe political element. Movies like Car Wash, Network, Switchblade Six Sisters reflect this. Every pro-union, black liberation, or anti-war protest of the 1970s included a crowd of people waving red flags and carrying pictures of Mao Zedong and chanting about the workers and the bosses. The groups clashed with each other and struggled to build a base among the population as the country and the world were rapidly changing during the 1970s. Right? In 1961, China and the Soviet Union parted ways. The initial reason for the split was Khrushchev's policies of the three peacefuls. Khrushchev had laid out a strategy of opposing the West based on peaceful coexistence between capitalist and socialist countries, peaceful transition from capitalism to socialism, and peaceful economic competition between capitalist and socialist countries. The idea was that the Soviet Union would do everything possible to prevent war with the capitalist West, peaceful coexistence, and would figure out how to more effectively churn out material goods, peaceful competition, and that would eventually lead the capitalist countries to see that socialism was more efficient and gradually, one step at a time, become socialist, peaceful transition. China strongly objected to these policies, believing that colonized nations had the right to take up arms against the imperialists, that socialist countries would always struggle when faced with encirclement from the threats of the Western imperialists, and that the idea that Western countries would gradually become socialist bit by bit was utter delusion. They accused Khrushchev of being a revisionist, the term originally coined by Edward Bernstein to describe his pro-imperialist theory that capitalism was gradually turning into socialism. The movement is everything, the goal is nothing. When China and Albania were economically cut off by the Soviet Union in response to their sharp critiques, China rallied its allies around the world to form new communist parties that took direction from Beijing rather than Moscow. After a few years, China launched the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution, mobilizing the youth to bombard the headquarters and drive, quote, capitalist roaders out of the government. Lin Biao, a general in the People's Liberation Army, compiled the Little Red Book of quotations from Chairman Mao Zedong. Lin Biao functioned as a leading figure of the early years of the Cultural Revolution and composed a document called Long Live the Victory of People's War, urging Mao's strategy of guerrilla warfare could be applied on a global scale. The text used similar language to Che Guevara when he called for 2-3 many Vietnams and argued that the third world was the global countryside. Lin Biao wrote, "Since World War II, U.S. imperialism has stepped into the shoes of German, Japanese, and Italian fascism and is trying to build a great American empire by dominating and enslaving the whole world. It is actively fostering Japanese and Western German militarism as its chief accomplices in unleashing a world war. Like a vicious world, it is bullying and enslaving various people, plundering their wealth, encroaching upon their country's sovereignty, and interfering in their internal affairs. It is the most rabid aggressor in human history, the most ferocious and common enemy of the people of the world. Every people or country in the world wants revolution, independence, and peace, but cannot direct the spearhead of its struggle against U.S. imperialism. At present, the main battlefield is the fierce struggle between the people of the world on the one side and U.S. imperialism and its lackeys on the other, the vast area of Asia, Africa, and Latin America. In the world as a whole, this is the area where the people suffer the worst oppression of imperialism and where imperialist rule is the most vulnerable. Since World War II, revolutionary storms have been rising in this area, and today they have become the most important force directly plundering U.S. imperialism, or directly pounding U.S. imperialism. The contradiction between the revolutionary peoples of Asia, Africa, and Latin America and the imperialists headed by the United States is the principal contradiction in the world today. The development of this contradiction is promoting the struggle of the people of the world against U.S. imperialism and its lackeys. History has proved and will go on proving that people's war is the most effective weapon against U.S. imperialism and its lackeys. All revolutionary people will learn to wage people's war against U.S. imperialism and its lackeys. They will take up arms, learn to fight battles, and become skilled in waging people's war, though they have not done so before. U.S. imperialism is like a mad bull dashing from place to place, will finally be burned in the ashes of blazing fire of people's war that it has provoked by its own actions. Like Mao's guerrilla army seized rural areas and seized the cities, the global revolutionary movement would seize the colonized countries first of the world, and it would then surround the first world. Must be emphasized that Comrade Mao Zedong's theory of the establishment of rural revolutionary base areas and the encirclement of cities from the countryside is of outstanding, universal, impractical importance for the present revolutionary struggles of the oppressed nations and peoples, and particularly the revolutionary struggles of the oppressed nations and the peoples in Asia, Africa, and Latin America against U.S. imperialism and its lackeys. Taking the entire globe, if North America and Western Europe can be called the cities of the world, then Asia, Africa, and Latin America constitute rural areas of the world. Since World War II, the proletarian revolutionary movement has, for various reasons, been temporarily held back in North America and Western European capitalist countries, while the peoples of the revolutionary movement in Asia, Africa, and Latin America are growing vigorously. In a sense, the contemporary world revolution also presents a picture of the encirclement of the cities by rural areas. In the final analysis, the whole cause of world revolution hinges on the revolutionary struggles of Asia, Africa, and Latin American peoples who make up the overwhelming majority of the people of the world. The socialist countries should regard it as their internationalist duty to support the people's struggles in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. The text called out the Soviet Union as revisionists and betrayers of people's war. Quote, "The Khrushchev revisionists have come to rescue U.S. imperialism just when it is most panic-stricken and helpless in its struggle to cope with people's war. Working hand in glove with the U.S. imperialists, they are doing their utmost to spread all kinds of arguments against people's war, and whenever they can, they are scheming to undermine it by overt and covert means. The fundamental reasons why the Khrushchev revisionists are opposed to the People's War is that they have no faith in the masses and are afraid of U.S. imperialism, afraid of war and of revolution. Like other opportunists, they are blind to the power of the masses, and they do not believe in the revolutionary people who are capable of defeating imperialism. They submit to nuclear blackmail from U.S. imperialism, and they are afraid of that. If the oppressed people and nations rise up to fight people's war with the socialist countries and repulse U.S. imperialist aggression, U.S. imperialism will become incensed, and they themselves will become involved, and their fond dreams of Soviet-U.S. cooperation to dominate the world will be spoiled. The Khrushchev revisionists insist that a nation without nuclear weapons is incapable of defeating an enemy with nuclear weapons, whatever methods of fighting it may adopt. This is tantamount to saying that anyone without nuclear weapons is destined to come to grief, destined to be bullied, and destined to be annihilated, and must either capitulate with the enemy or be confronted with his nuclear weapons, or someday come under the protection of some nuclear power and submit to its beck and call. Isn't this the law of the jungle and the survive per excellence? Isn't this helping the imperialists in their nuclear blackmail? Isn't this openly forbidding people to make revolution? February 1967 marked the climax of the first stage of the Cultural Revolution, with followers of Lin Biao seizing control of Shanghai in the famous January Storm. Shanghai was declared to be an autonomous people's commune in which direct workers' democracy reigned. Shortly afterwards, Mao Zedong criticized the move, and the People's Commune was dissolved. Zhang Shenqiao, the editor of the Communist newspaper of Shanghai, assumed leadership, arguing that mob rule and chaos were insufficient to maintain a socialist government. With the backing of Mao and his wife, Jiang Qing, the regional revolutionary committees led by the military were established as the new ruling bodies, replacing local organs of the Communist Party, but also ending chaos and mob rule. At the founding of the Beijing Municipal Revolutionary Committee, Zhang proclaimed, "Our great proletarian cultural revolution is in the high tide of the struggle of the proletarian revolutionaries to seize world power on the basis of their alliance. All-out criticism and repudiation of top party people in authority taking the country on the capitalist road is starting throughout the country. The establishment of the Beijing Municipal Revolutionary Committee at this important juncture is an immense encouragement to the proletarian revolutionaries all over the land. We are fully confident that, born of the revolutionary struggle, this provisional organ of power, which is revolutionary and representative and has proletarian revolutionary authority, will be able to lead the proletarian revolutionaries of the capital forward to continue their march in the van of the battle for the great proletarian revolution in China and make still more brilliant contributions to the complete victory of the Cultural Revolution in the capital and the country as a whole. We are also fully confident that this provisional organ of power will be able to build our capital into a great school for creative study and the application of Mao Zedong thought, a capital which will never change its color, a model for which the whole country and an example for the world. Comrades in arms, we are Chairman Mao's fighters, firing at a common enemy from the same trench. While in Beijing, we, the provisional and municipal delegations, have gained much excellent experience, particularly in the new experience we have created in the process of bringing about the revolutionary Great Alliance and the revolutionary 3-in-1 combination, and your experience of establishing Conference of Representative Revolutionary Workers and Staff, Congresses of Red Guards of universities and colleges, middle schools and conferences, and poor and lower and middle peasants. As Lin Biao moved more into the background, Zhang Shenqiao, Mao Zedong's wife, Jiang Qing, and two other individuals known as the Gang of Four became the primary voices of Chinese communism. When the Soviet Union intervened in Czechoslovakia to remove the US-backed democratic socialist who had seized power, China rolled out a new phrase, Soviet social imperialism. No longer was the Soviet Union simply revisionist. Now China was proclaiming that the USSR was another capitalist imperialist society. And the Cold War was merely an inter-imperialist rivalry. China began providing military aid and training to US-backed anti-communist fighters in Angola, who had assassinated members of the pro-Soviet Movement for the Liberation of the People of Angola, the MPLA, that fought against the Portuguese colonizers. The death of Lin Biao took place on September 13th, 1971, and the circumstances remain shrouded in mystery. It is generally understood that he attempted some kind of coup against Mao Zedong or other leading party figures, and then he fled to the Soviet Union after it failed. His plane crashed in Mongolia. After the fall of Lin Biao, the Gang of Four steered Chinese foreign policy in an increasingly pro-U.S. direction. China proclaimed the USSR to be the main danger to the people of the world. China's Red Guard youth were deported from the cities and sent to do farm labor in the countryside. Efforts to expand China's industrial output were frequently interrupted by strikes and political mobilizations by the Gang of Four. U.S. President Richard Nixon visited China in 1972 and was given a hero's welcome. They proclaimed that a third world war was inevitable. William Hinton explained the prevailing view of foreign policy in Beijing in an interview with The Guardian published in 1976. Quote, "When we asked about war, can a third world war be prevented? Thinking in China is that short of a revolution in the US and the USSR, a third world war is inevitable. The people of the world can take measures that may delay war, but as long as these two great powers, the Americans and the Russians, exist in their present form and content for dominance, war is bound to come. Détente is an illusion, a smokescreen that covers up underlying stark reality, an arms buildup leading to a war. The thinking in Beijing seems to be, in 3 to 5 years, war is unlikely. In 10 years, it is a possibility. And if one thinks in terms of 30 years, the time that has elapsed since World War II, it is likely to be sooner rather than later. Another 30 years without a world war, impossible. Does world war mean nuclear war? Not necessarily. The feeling is that a major world war might well be fought with conventional arms. Even a nuclear war will not destroy mankind. Mankind will destroy the bomb. The bomb will not destroy mankind. At least half the human race will survive. War will hasten revolution, and revolution will solve the problems that remain unsolved. Today, there is still a major contradiction between the peoples of the world and the two superpowers. As between the two superpowers, one, the Soviet Union, is more dangerous than the other. It is, in fact, the main danger confronting the people of the world. So now, a more appropriate slogan might be, mobilize the third world, unite the forces of the second world, neutralize the United States, and strike the main blow against the Soviet Union. China judges world leaders by how well they understand this new relationship of forces. Thus, they prefer Heath to Wilson, Strauss to Brandt, and Schlesinger to Kissinger. These shifting politics confused many young radicals in the United States, who were attempting to build a new communist party aligned with Beijing. For them, condemnation of the U.S. imperialist war in Vietnam had been the main aspect of their radicalization. To now follow a government that saw Nixon as an ally and the Soviet-aligned Vietnamese movement as agents of Soviet imperialism was extremely confusing. Some of the new communist movement organizations simply disregarded China's foreign policy entirely, while hailing the Cultural Revolution and celebrating China as a stronghold of socialism. When the Watergate scandal and a congressional inquiry paved the way for Nixon's resignation in 1974, the Revolutionary Union, precursor to the Revolutionary Communist Party, one of the main NCM groups, held marches on Washington to, quote, throw the bum out. Some of the rhetoric of the RU activists almost seemed to be calling for his ouster by the deep state, with speakers saying things like, why we don't care if his helicopter crashes or if he just gets lost on the way to the John. We just want him out. When the CIA toppled the Chilean government in 1973 and oversaw the brutal slaughter of thousands of leftists, China embraced Augusto Pinochet as an ally against the main danger of Soviet social imperialism. However, many of the young China-aligned communists joined the protests in support of Salvador Allende and against the U.S. government over the coup. The October League Marxist-Leninist, which later changed its name to the Communist Party Marxist-Leninist, defined itself as being the most solidly in line with Beijing in terms of foreign policy. Mike Klonsky, the chairman of the CPML, frequently traveled to China, and the group more or less had China's official backing. The Revolutionary Communist Party defined itself as being the most visible and blatantly pro-communist, convening rallies with red flags and portraits of Mao, but it often strayed from or flat out ignored Chinese foreign policy. The slew of other organizations fit somewhere in between. The groups exchanged harsh polemics against each other and often physically attacked each other. The FBI heavily infiltrated all of the groups, and this was revealed by the New York Times. Subsequent academic works revealed that Western Goals, a private intelligence service set up by members of the John Birch Society, trained members to become FBI informants inside of communist organizations. Joe Burton, an FBI informant inside the new communist movement, received a great deal of attention when he went public and then sued the FBI for violating his civil rights. Burton told the New York Times and The Guardian how he had been sent to infiltrate the communist groups and attempt to entrap members into illegal activities. Burton spread false rumors among communist groups, incited groups to attack each other, and functioned as part of a whole network of FBI informants and infiltrators that caused dysfunction and confusion among communists. Burton had established his own communist group in New Orleans called the Red Star Cadre, and he used it to establish links and sow discord among communist groups throughout the country. He said, "The Bureau got me into believing that we were looking for guns, explosives, and people who were actively blowing things up. Other countries who were infiltrating here, and groups and individuals whose ultimate goal was to overthrow our constitutional form of government. And it wouldn't be too hard for me to be antagonistic to people like that. But the truth of the matter was, after 18 months, that wasn't what we were doing. There was no reason at that time in 1972 for me not to accept what the FBI told me was true. Only after knowing these people for a while and doing monthly analysis on what we were doing, do you come to the conclusion that at no time in that period did I ever see or have reason to believe that any of these people were armed beyond the point that they could legally be armed as private citizens. And I testified to the Senate committee that there were no arms, no ammunition, no bombs, no explosives, and no money." The Guardian quoted local activists saying that they all caught on that something was off about Joe Burton, reporting nearly everyone was suspicious of him from the beginning, a longtime Tampa activist said. "It was clear to us that if he was not a cop, he was missing a paycheck. He would promote splits, distrust, and confusion." Don H. Wright, a member of the National Committee of the Revolutionary Communist Party, is revealed to have been an FBI informer who used the issue of race and his African-American background to manipulate the organization. All right, so that's page 50. That's where we're leaving off for now, but we will continue this book until we finish it, and then we'll have an audio book of it. So that's me reading from The New Communist Movement, Party Building in 1970s America. So very good. Check out this book. All right, so we're going to do the roll call. Names and locations, names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations, who is with us tonight? Names and locations, who is with us, names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. We got Jake in Portland, Oregon. Good to meet you, Jake. Good to see you. Names and locations, who else is with us tonight? Names and locations, names and locations. We got George Muniz in Sydney. We got Lawrence Johnson in Chicago, John McCarthy in Chicago, Joshua Tree, California, Kinkle, Yusuf in Durham, North Carolina. Good to see you. We got currently in Sydney, Australia, David Fox, Alex in Brazil. We got Rennie in Hamilton, Ontario. We got Elysia in Virginia. We got John in Florida. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Names and locations. We got Alex in Brazil. We got Ryan in Kansas City, Colin in Greensboro, John in Florida. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Names and locations, I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations. Kew Gardens in New York, Checkpoint Charlie, Colin in Greensboro. Anybody else? Victoria, British Columbia. Very, very good. Names and locations. Anybody else with us tonight? Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Who is with us? Names and locations. Anybody else? Now we are taking questions. Questions can be sent via Rumble Rants, or you can Cash App me at Caleb Maupin 22, or you can send them the way that I would prefer via Buy Me a Coffee. Oh, Ellie in Chicago. Welcome, Ellie. Buy Me a Coffee is a great way to send your questions. It goes straight to me. Boom, goes into my email. John McCarthy already sent a question that way, and there are multiple Rumble rants that have come in. Multiple Rumble rants have already been sent in. So what I'm going to do is I am going to put on some music, while I refill my water, and I'm going to give you all another chance to ask more questions while I wait for you all to send more questions. I see Funky just sent a great question via Rumble rant. So yeah, send some questions. Send some questions, y'all. Send some questions, and I will put some music on, and then I will come back and answer questions, and then we'll be done for the night. So think of what you'd like me to answer. Because we've been talking about Mao and China and the Cultural Revolution, this is a Chinese anthem called Golden Mountain in Beijing. And this is Cornelius Cardew's instrumental version of it. I find it to be very peaceful. It's actually an old Tibetan melody that the communists adopted and made it a song about Mao Zedong. And it's very peaceful and soothing. This is called Golden Mountain in Beijing. So enjoy Golden Mountain in Beijing, and then I'll answer your questions when I get back. Yeah, I like that melody, right? I find it to be very peaceful. I really, really like that melody, and it's an old Tibetan melody, and They turned it into, a Maoist anthem, and then Cornelius Cardew did his 70s rock jam tempo stoner vibe. I mean, I'm sure they weren't using drugs. They were Maoist communists, right? You're not using drugs. That's bourgeois decadence. But there you go. I'm still blown away by that amazing parade. And I guess I'll start answering people's questions. Oh, Gabby in Chicago. Yeah, it definitely is a beautiful melody. It's really, really great. So yeah, any questions you all got, you can still send them. I'm going to answer questions here until I end this stream. So, it's after midnight, but hey, I can keep going. I'm not planning to get up early in the morning, so we can keep going for a bit here. We started pretty late. So, if you got any questions, Rumble Rants, Caleb Oppen 22 on Cash App, or buy me a coffee. So I guess I'll start with John, since he did it via Buy Me a Coffee, which I like the most. He said the Democratic Party should be criticizing President Trump for not attending the victory parade in China. Instead, they are blaming him for it happening. And yeah, like first of all, why wouldn't there be a huge victory parade on the anniversary of the World War II? It's 80 years since the Japanese invaders were defeated. Why in the world wouldn't there be? I mean, they're condemning him for it happening. Do you think it wouldn't be happening if we had a Democrat president? Do you think if Biden was president, it wouldn't be happening? Like, that's crazy. Why wouldn't there be a big parade? Trump should be there because America was a big part of that fight. And, Trump did say, I do remember when he was first running, he went on Bill O'Reilly's show and he said, you can't put Russia and China together. You can't push Russia and China together. Obama's done that. There is some illusion among Trump people that they're going to pull Russia away from China. That's not going to happen, right? And the natural gas deal that was just signed, which is a really big deal, the natural gas deal that was just signed, it is, to some effect. I mean, you could argue that that is solidifying their relationship. China has a huge industry and Russia is an energy power, and Russia has to sell natural gas to somebody. And so they're building a pipeline to start selling a lot more natural gas to China. And, they're bonded economically. Russia and China were pulled apart before China had fully industrialized. When China was, just lifting up its head during the Mao years, there was a fight between Khrushchev and Mao. And China resisted going into the U.S. camp, but ultimately, starting in 1969, they started pivoting into the U.S. camp. That's not going to happen now because both Russia and China are fully industrial countries. They're fully powerful economic countries, and their relationship is based on trade and proximity. They're close to each other. China is a huge industrial country, and they need lots of oil and gas to run their industries. And Russia is a major energy power, and they sell oil and gas. And they need someone to buy their oil and gas. And the USA has been hostile to both countries and put sanctions on both countries. So that's driven them closer and closer together. So you're not going to pull Russia and China apart. You're just not going to do that. It's just not going to happen. There is some illusion among Trump people that they're going to do that by being nice to Russia. They're going to get Russia to join the U.S. crusade against China. A lot of Trumpers think that. And you can believe whatever you want, but it's just not going to happen, right? Because the relationship is not about that. North Korea is an important factor in this, right? And I just want to talk about this briefly, right? Why did John Bolton wreck the talks with North Korea? Why? I'll tell you why. He wrecked the talks with North Korea, the peace talks, because look, this is what the issue is. North Korea is going to give up its nuclear weapons at some point. When it has assurance from Russia and China that it won't be overthrown, that they will militarily protect it under all circumstances, they'll say, fine, we'll give up our nukes. When they give up their nukes, the United Nations sanctions that have been imposed on North Korea for leaving the Non-Proliferation Treaty, for getting nuclear weapons, will be lifted. At that point, North Korea will have its reform and opening up, and they will have their Deng Xiaoping moment, and they will have market reforms. The reason that John Bolton doesn't want that to happen is because John Bolton is an anti-communist, and he is a pro-imperialist, he's a neocon, and that in the 80s, many governments in Eastern Europe Romania, Czechoslovakia, eventually the USSR itself, they had market reforms. They reformed and opened up. And that led the United States to go in there, and eventually the communist government was overthrown. That was very successful across Eastern Europe. However, in China in 1978, they had market reforms, and China didn't get overthrown. And they tried to overthrow China in 1989 with the Tiananmen events, but it didn't work. And Vietnam had a huge amount of market reforms, and they did not get overthrown. And actually, today, the Chinese Communist Party is much stronger than it was, and China is a much stronger and more powerful country than it was in 1978. They've really built themselves up. Vietnam, the Communist Party of Vietnam, is more powerful and stronger, right? So in Asia, the market reform strategy to overthrow a country does not work. It worked in the Eastern Bloc because of some unique circumstances related to the history, because of what they'd been through during World War II, and because of kind of the quote unquote Stalinist political model. It was very hard to bring reform. And yes, they were able to bring down the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc that way. They were not able to bring down, Vietnam. They were not able to bring down China that way. Now, the other thing is that North Korea is a little bit different than Vietnam and China in that they're still technically at war with the United States. The United States has never diplomatically recognized them. The USA killed 4 million people in North Korea during the Korean War, and the USA starved to death maybe possibly up to 1 million people in the 90s with the sanctions. And North Korea is very, very ideological. And the Vietnamese Communist Party, there's a wing of it that likes the United States because the United States is an ally against China. The Chinese Communist Party, there's a wing of them that, says we need to just tone down all this communism stuff and all of that. That is not the case. That is not the case when it comes to North Korea. North Korea has been at war with the United States. North Korea has been subjected to a huge amount of suffering with the United States. So when North Korea has its reform and opening up and becomes a much stronger country, that will enable North Korea, a country that is much more, quote unquote, anti-American, much more anti-imperialist in its foreign policy orientation. All these countries are anti-imperialist. The imperialists want to destroy all of them. But North Korea has an ideological anti-imperialist orientation, much more so than China, though China is pivoting more in that direction, much more so than Vietnam, which maybe that doesn't make sense with Vietnam's history, but that's just kind of where Vietnam is because of their rivalry with China, etc. Because of that, North Korea has a much more ideological anti-imperialist stance in foreign policy and ideological orientation. And the fear on John Bolton's part is that as a result, the anti-Americanism of North Korea will get strengthened as North Korea is strengthened. And a country that is very, very ideologically opposed to U.S. imperialism will expand its influence around the globe. North Korea already makes cell phones in-house. North Korea's the overwhelming majority of the population speak more than one language. They really push dual languages there. Those mountains are full of minerals. North Korea is a very, very prosperous country. And it's going to be a boom in North Korea when they have their reform and opening up, when they have their Deng Xiaoping moment. The fear of John Bolton and others is that will lead to the anti-Americanism and the anti-imperialism of North Korea spreading. Now, my relationship with all of this is complex. There's a lot of nuance here. I am fully anti-imperialist, completely. Right? I view the globalist imperialist economic order that is centered around Wall Street and London as the main threat to humanity. I view that also as a threat to America. It is a threat to the American people. It is a threat to us. That's the reason we're suffering. We must overthrow globalism and imperialism. And doing so is the ultimate expression of patriotism. I think that we are the ultimate patriots in wanting to drive out globalism, imperialism, and wanting to stand in solidarity with the people like the North Koreans who want to resist globalism and imperialism. So, I am not anti-American, but I am definitely anti-globalist, anti-imperialist. And that said, John Bolton is afraid that North Korea's anti-imperialism, anti-globalism will spread. However, if I'm being strategic and I'm being diplomatic, right? And I want to say to John Bolton, and I want to say to others, look, okay, you're concerned about that. Well, here's the thing. If America has a role in North Korea's reform and opening up, that will lessen the amount of quote unquote anti-Americanism in that move. Think about it, right? If America is involved in enabling North Korea to have an economic boom, and if American companies are part of the foreign investment that comes into North Korea, that will cause whatever anti-Americanism there's going to be. And there will be, because of what U.S. imperialism has done to North Korea. U.S. imperialism has killed millions of Koreans. But if America has a seat at the table and America is party to the reform and opening up of North Korea, that will lessen the amount of quote unquote anti-Americanism that comes out of it. And that's something that John Bolton and Tulsi Gabbard and others should keep in mind, right? Is that if you don't want, North Korea is gonna open up. It's gonna happen. It's only a matter of time. The question is, do you want them to open up with no relationship with the United States, completely at odds with the United States, or do you want the United States to have a role in their opening up? That is how we need to put it, right? Because these are nuanced, complicated situations, right? Ultimately, the only future that America has is breaking out of globalism, imperialism. We need a government of action that'll fight for working families, that'll stand up to Wall Street, that'll oppose the imperialists and the big monopolies and pivot us into a multipolar world and joining this new economy that's based on growth and economic development. I don't know if you saw, but the Russian president, Putin, and Xi Jinping and Kim Jong-un were openly talking about how they believe that in the next 20 years, the human life expectancy will increase to 150. I think that's pretty awesome. 150. That's pretty amazing, isn't it? But apparently, with AI and with biotechnology, human organs can be reproduced, and that's what they're discussing. Isn't that wild? Right? From what I understand is there are very, very, very rarely people who live to be 120 years old. But can you imagine that the overall human life expectancy expands to be 150 years old? Wow. Wouldn't that be a great victory for humanity? Wouldn't that be great? And that's what they're talking about, right? At the World Economic Forum, they're talking about how they can decrease the population and speed up the death of people, right? And how they can reduce the population, etc. But now, at the Shanghai Cooperation Summit, they're talking about how to increase the the life expectancy to 150 years. There's one civilization that stands for death, Malthusianism, depopulation, decay, a great cemetery. And there's another section of the world that stands for growth, innovation, and the expansion of the human creativity and human labor power. And again, are we going to join with life or death, right? And I believe the American people believe in growth and they believe in life and they want a government of action that will invest in people. And ultimately, America will join the anti-imperialist camp. It's not going to be easy, though. It's going to require a mass movement. And there's a lot of confusion. And there's, we ultimately need an anti-monopoly coalition. We need to get out of the movement to the masses because the left is dead. The left is a dead end. And I don't want to beat that horse too hard. I scream and yell about this on these streams, and it's not worth repeating tonight. But if you keep doing the socialism and communism thing, if you're hanging out with Linda Sarsour and Brian Becker in Detroit, you're never going to get to the masses, right? You have to break with leftism. The American spirit is pro-growth. It is, right? It is pro-growth, and we need to embrace American optimism, American growth, American innovation, and push it in an anti-imperialist direction. The basis upon which America will become an anti-imperialist country will be on the basis of celebrating human creativity and innovation, right? That's how it's going to happen. It's not going to happen on the basis of class struggle because this is America, right? In America, the poor believe they are temporarily embarrassed millionaires, right? In America, we don't believe in resentment around wealth. And DSA is digging its own grave. All this talk of income inequality, right? I mean, I have said here over and over again, we're not trying to make everyone equal. We're trying to have a society where the banks and the factories and the industries are rationally organized so that human growth and innovation is unlimited. We're trying to have a government that invests in the people to produce labor power and wealth. We're trying to have a government that mobilizes to unleash wealth and abundance. We are not trying to make everyone equally poor. Okay. And we definitely don't think growth is bad. So yeah, we we need to pivot to innovationism and understand that we need an anti-monopoly government and a pro-growth, pro-community, pro-humanity, pro-family government, an anti-monopoly government that invests in communities. That's what we need. That's the only way America is going to be anti-imperialist. And if you just keep doing the communism thing, it's not going to fly here, right? It's not going to fly here. We need to make clear that what we want is a government that invests in people to create growth, right? And that's a hard pill for a lot of people to swallow. But if you understand this country and the way it works, and you understand the nature of 21st century socialism, the way China is, the way Vietnam is, the way Cuba is, the way Nicaragua is, you understand that this is not a fight necessarily. This isn't between the Soviet model and Western liberal democracy capitalism. It's a fight between pro-growth economies in the BRICS and the anti-growth direction that Western imperialism is going amid a crisis of overproduction that their irrational system cannot solve. Right. And that's what I have spent a lot of time explaining on these streams. And it's not easy stuff. I mean, it's not, this isn't kindergarten communism, kindergarten stuff. This is a worker. This is a capitalist, this is like advanced trigonometry here. And we're understanding that capitalism, globalism, imperialism that we live under, right, is entering a stage where the only way it can sustain itself is with cannibalism. Right. And with degrowth, and that it is basically trapped in an inevitable Malthusian downward spiral because it can't handle technological advances. And we need a state that will control the means of production. And we need to overcome the irrationality of the market and profits in command to overcome that. Innovationism is amazing. It is well grounded, and it's a complex ideology. It's a new stage. Right? We're doing something new. We're in line with what they're doing in Russia. We're in line with what they're doing in China. We're in line with what they're doing in Iran and Venezuela and Cuba and Nicaragua, and especially with Burkina Faso. I can't wait. Penny just recorded an audiobook of her book about Ibrahim Traore. We are in line with the pro-growth, anti-imperialist movement of the world. But in order to do that, we have to, get out of step with what people think communism is, right? Right? I mean, we're not trying to make everybody equal, right? We're trying to create a world with so much wealth and abundance that there's no poverty and everyone's pretty much equal because there's just so much wealth, right? We're not trying to get rid of income inequality. We're definitely not trying to tax people, right? It's not about taxes. It's about having a powerful government that fights for working families, a government of action that fights for working families, based on an anti-monopoly coalition that breaks the power of the big monopolies and unleashes human power. And in order to do that, we have to get out of the movement to the masses. And that's what we're all about with CPI. And, join us, become a member. Somebody joined last night. That was great. I went and checked. They were reached out to. Gabby reached out to them today and sent them an email. And, people are joining. And that's great. Become an innovationist. Get involved in this real American anti-imperialist movement that could actually win. So there you go. All right. So I answered John's question. So now we're going to do the Rumble rants, and then I think we'll be done unless people send more questions. If you want to send a question, you can send it via Buy Me a Coffee, or you can send it Cash App, Caleb Maupin 22, or you can send it via Rumble rants. The best way to do it is Buy Me a Coffee. Send me any questions you want me to answer before the end of the show here. We're at the 2-hour mark, but we'll keep going. All right. Leo Messi says, Russian and Eastern European women forced out of the workforce after the fall of the USSR. I heard less Russian women are in the workforce now under Putin in the 80s. I don't know anything about that, honestly. I have absolutely no idea. What I do know is that in the Soviet economic system, women were expected to have full-time employment as well as men. And that they did, have collective kitchens. So women weren't expected to cook for the household. That's where fast food kind of originated from. Women were provided with employment. Women were in the military. Women voted. Women were government officials. I also know that after the fall of the Soviet Union, there was a huge rise in sex trafficking from Eastern Europe. And that it was a real tragedy, but there were millions of desperately poor women Millions of desperately poor men too. But the fall of the Soviet Union was economically devastating, and one of the most horrendous aspects of the fall of the Soviet Union was human trafficking, sex trafficking, and it was very horrendous, and it's awful. And it's one of the realities of counter-revolution and the destruction of the Soviet Union economically. Yeah, so there you go. Yeah. Penny says Ukraine sends drones to ISIS in the Sahel and other African countries, but Burkina Faso just liberated another village in western Burkina Faso. They're dancing in the streets and cheering for Traore in Russia. Yeah, it's funny. A lot of conservatives in America want to fight ISIS and want to fight Al Qaeda. This is the guy you need to. This guy fights Al Qaeda and ISIS like nobody else, right? And Wahhabi ideology, which is the basis for ISIS, which is the basis for, Boko Haram became ISIS in Africa. The basis of the brutal, terrorist ideology is Saudi, Wahhabism, the Wahhabi interpretation of Sunni Islam, which Saudi Arabia has spread all over the world. And Russia knows how to fight those people because they've been fighting them. They've been fighting them since the 50s. The Chechen separatists believed in that shit. And the Afghan, folks, and the Soviet Union has been fighting against Wahhabis for years. They know how to deal with them. And that's why people like Michael Flynn want to align with Russia, because Russia knows how to fight Islamic terrorism. They know how to fight Wahhabism, and they know how to fight it very, very effectively. And they're helping Africa fight it right now. And Ibrahim Traore, the great African leader, he's doing a great job fighting ISIS. So great. Thank you for that update, Penny. Thank you for that update. Very, very good. Leo Messi says, how did Russia and Nicaragua reduce crime without martial law? What can we learn from them? Well, the main thing was providing economic opportunity, right? In Nicaragua, they had a land redistribution program. They gave people their own land. They funded businesses with their micro entrepreneurship program. Thousands of cooperatives have been started with government money. And if people have a job and they have economic opportunity and they have their own land and they're getting subsidized by the government to produce their own food, then they tend to not, try and join a gang or a criminal organization. It's very similar to how China got rid of the terrorism problem. In Tibet and in the Uyghur, the Muslim regions of China, they had terrorism issues. And what they did is they provided jobs and job training programs and economic opportunities. And now they don't have an issue, right? It's with economic opportunity. That's the main way that they curbed, crime in both of those countries, has been with creating economic opportunity. That is generally the best way to get rid of crime if people have economic opportunity. Now, I saw this thing, Hempcar shared the news story about how Marco Rubio's brother was a cocaine trafficker. And that's not surprising because the right-wing anti-communist forces in Latin America that Marco Rubio is aligned with, they talk about the Miami Mafia, they were involved in all kinds of drug stuff in Nicaragua, and paramilitaries in Colombia were heavily involved in the drug trade. Look, 7 in South America are made in Colombia. Right. And Ecuador is now increasingly rising as a drug country, drug, trafficking hub. The idea that Venezuela is a narco state is absolutely ridiculous. Right. I mean, I'm sure there are drug gangs there, but compared to most countries in the region, they're much better off. This is just the latest thing. I talked about that in my interview with WBAI that I put on earlier that's going to premiere on the channel tomorrow. You just look at the facts, the UN research on drugs in Latin America. Venezuela is not a key country for the drug trade. Colombia is, right? El Salvador is, but Ecuador is increasingly becoming one, but Venezuela is not a drug trade hub. And Cuba, who is a primary ally of Venezuela, is the country that is the most effective in, they have almost no drug problem at all in Cuba. Right. The Cuban government has pretty much completely eradicated the drug trade. And Cuba is heavily aligned with Venezuela. And the U.S., Drug Enforcement Agency and others have said, Dan, Cuba is like the model for the most effective anti-drug country. So, the idea that the USA is fighting Venezuela because of drugs, that's the stupidest, most ridiculous thing ever. So, yeah, just don't buy it. Funky says, with all the civil and financial unrest in the U.S., could you see a military coup at some point? Oh, I totally could. I totally could. I think it's very possible. That's why, I think Trump is using the military and putting them on the streets of DC, putting them on the streets of cities, is Trump anticipates attempts to overthrow him. I think he absolutely does. The removal of Trump in 2020 was very much an electoral coup by the FBI. But then Trump won the election again because things were so bad, because Biden didn't improve it. And I think Trump fears that sections of the military would move against him. I mean, we saw the resignation. I think was it Mattis, one of the generals that resigned from the military when Trump was president his first term, basically accused Trump of being a traitor to the country, of being, an ally of Russia and China, which he's not. Trump is just selfish, and sometimes he does good things for his own reasons. I don't think Trump is an anti-imperialist at all. I think he's just he's a selfish politician who wants to be effective. He wants to have a political dynasty. But because he's not a team player for imperialism, because he's thinking in terms of what is good for himself and his political dynasty, he does good things, as occasionally. And so they want him out. And I think Trump fears that. But then Trump is also building up a layer of people, in ICE in particular, but also in, different sections of the deep state that are loyal to him. And this is complicated, right? Again, what Tulsi Gabbard has done with exposing Russiagate, with, the possibility of arresting John Bolton, purging the warmongers and the neocons in the deep state, that has real potential. And we need to support that as much as we possibly can. And we need to be in this game. If they can actually, lock up the Russiagators, if they can actually purge the state of the John Bolton crowd because they lied to get a war in Ukraine going, that would be a great step forward. We need to find ways to, we can't just sit back and condemn them all and just thumb our nose and say, we have to be in the game. Right? We have to take agency. A lot of people just see this as passive entertainment. We have to be involved in the struggle, right? To get our country into the new rising economy, to build anti-imperialist ideology and a mass movement in this country. We have our work to do, right? And with CPI, our goal is not to get you to be our audience. Our goal is to get you in the game, get you active. Penny joined. She's very active. Noah, we'll give you stuff to do. We want you to be in on the action. That's what we want. So, yeah. I did a slideshow about that premiered today earlier. I'm about to put an article on the website, like an article version of that slideshow. I've been kind of waiting until that slideshow premiered. We want to take sides. And right now there is an effort to fight the neocons within the deep state. That's why my book is selling so well. I'll just take a moment to brag here, right? We are still at #1. It's been a week that the book is out. We are still at #1 new release in radical political thought. This book is breaking records, folks. I have never seen anything like it. It is at #1. People are buying this book. There's a reason for that. People want to know about the neocons. And I have done the research year after year to write this book. And so, let's keep doing it. I'm going to pitch myself to a lot more podcasts about this. And, we have the Khrushchevism book, which is along the similar lines. It kind of tells a similar story, just from a different angle. We're doing great stuff with CPI. No one's doing what we're doing. We're saying out of the movement to the masses. We're building a collection of people that can carry out anti-imperialist operations. We're doing it. And if you're with CPI, you're doing it. So yeah. Thanks everybody. I am probably going to call it a night. I don't see any more questions that have come in. So I am probably going to call it a night here. So yeah. Did you read super chats yet? Yes, I did. I responded to yours. And I did. It was good. And I don't see any more that have come in. So I am starting to yawn. So I'm starting to say goodnight here. But I'll be back tomorrow. So no worries. Talk to you all soon. I'm going to put on the closing music and we'll be back tomorrow. And it's a daily struggle. We just got to keep going, right? We need to just keep our eyes on the mission and do what we got to do. So dare to struggle, dare to win. Join the Center for Political Innovation. Talk to y'all soon. new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.